I think I would like to open the session for any question from the participants, and introduce yourself, and direct a question please to any of the panelists.
I think it's timely that you mentioned to us that freedom in its absolute form, you need to be what's called exercising caution. I like the way where you reminded us about this absolute freedom, that if we are too obsessed with freedom, it becomes a very delicate subject to handle. And if I am in a position of authority, responsible for administering this country, I get very scared, you know. My question to you is, managing this freedom, you know, when do you come in with rules and regulations, and when do you come in with some common sense among the people who like to exercise this freedom? Because the way I see it, this subject of freedom is a very, what you call, loosely defined, very subjective, and at times when people talk on a subject, they thought that they could say anything that they like, to the point of being disparaging to some people, you know. But freedom in its true sense, you know, is a beautiful thing. Everyone should practice and have it. You know. But there is always that worry, you know, that if it goes beyond the boundaries, transgress into the unknown, uncharted waters, the repercussions are, I tell you, will be very scary. You know. So can I have some thoughts on that, please?
Shall we take a number of questions?
Yeah, I'll take a second question, please. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the enlightening discussion. I'd like to make a comment and a question, and that is, I find that increasingly the government is a bit irrational. Irrational in its responses in terms of using religion, using race, using the law to suppress the opinions of people. So in light of these irrational reactions from the government, of course it's planned irrationality. How would you suggest that we should respond in such a situation? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Haziq. Thank you for all your speeches. They were very enlightening. I have two questions, and the first is addressed to Dr. Anas. Doctor, you say that Islam is a religion of freedom, right? And what comes to mind is that when I was reading about the history of Islam and Nabi Muhammad's actions, because you know Islam is based on revelation and history and stuff, Nabi Muhammad ordered the destruction of religious idols in Mecca. And isn't that a form of suppression of freedom in itself? You know, I'm just curious as to how certain Islamic actions are antithetical to the concept of freedom, but yet you advocate that Islam is a religion of freedom. And my second question is that, just to provide some context, I'm a liberal myself and I advocate for freedom and tolerance, but when you think of the concept of language and how we define freedom and liberalism, it's very loosely defined. And I find myself asking that I am tolerant about everything except intolerance. I advocate for freedom, but I do not allow people to believe in anti-freedom. I advocate for freedom, that freedom should take precedence over these things. So there is a contradiction in itself in the concept of freedom itself. So what are your thoughts on that? I'm just curious. Thank you.
Next one.
Okay, just a few ideas. Some of the questions I'll try to answer directly, but I think that generally we're sort of roaming around similar kind of thoughts. The main thought is what do we mean by freedom? Not in terms of, I think the question is not in terms of the concept, which is a highly philosophical debate. I think that what we're worried about is freedom in terms of practice, in terms of policy. What do we mean by freedom? How do we exercise freedom? And how can we adopt and implement freedom in its purest form? I think that there are certain underlying conditions that need to be present and prevalent in order for freedom to be realized. For instance, I mean, how can you have a free society where equality doesn't persist, isn't present, where people are unequal? How can you claim to be free? I mean, one of the biggest problems that Western societies today have is a great economic disparity. There is a growing, an ever-growing, impoverished section of community opposite to an ever-growing, extremely rich and affluent section of society. How can you speak of freedom when people actually don't have the choice? You can tell anyone, listen, you're free, you can go to whatever university you want. But if they don't have the ability to get the kind of educational opportunities that others do, then how can you say that they're free? It's like, you know, it's like me and Azmi hitting the gym and you telling us both, well, you're free to hit the 100 kilo, you know, bench and you could, I can't, of course I can, he will, I can't. So it's sort of that kind of discussion. When you tell people that they're free, but ultimately in America you only give them a choice between the Democrats and Republicans. I mean, I'm sorry, but what kind of choice when ultimately people have the choice of very bad and slightly less bad? What kind of choice is that? So freedom, in a sense, is a mirage. At this moment of time, it's presented as a mirage. It's a vote grabbing, it's a populist concept. It's something that all politicians and people at election campaigns, they use. But really very society, in a sense, doesn't really allow for the practice of. So, I mean, for instance, you can't really have freedom in a society that doesn't have equality. And by the way, I use the word equality here, which I personally don't entirely agree with, because I don't think that equality is what we're talking about. What we're talking about is equity. Equity, meaning that people will always have various physical as well as mental variances. You can't expect everyone to have the very same capacity to understand a mathematical formula, for instance, or read the Constitution and understand it fully. You can't have that. These are, you know, certain gifts that people have, and to varying degrees. We all have our things that we're extremely good at and others that we're less good at. But what we're talking about is equity, whereby we have equal opportunities, where we have the tools to compensate for our deficiencies. And they are afforded to everyone, and we have equal access. That is what we're talking about. So, also, freedom within an environment of mutual respect. That I am free, but you know what? I'm not going to exercise my freedom because I might infringe on your sensibilities. I might hurt you. You know that it's a reasonable thing. It's a reasonable thing. You know, we all do it in everyday life. You know, we sort of don't do some things which we might be free to do because we don't want to annoy our neighbors. We we refrain from certain acts which we are free to do because we don't want to sort of hurt our relatives or our friends or the such. Okay? We go out of our way sometimes when we don't need to, because we need to respond to a call of help from someone whom we know. It happens every single day. That is how life rotates. That is how life works. Without it, we would fall apart. If everyone was to say, well, listen, you know, I'm free and I'll stick to my freedoms and I'll abide by them religiously if you wish, then life won't happen the way that we do. We won't have a charitable sector. We won't have, you know, a voluntary sector because people are free not to go into the voluntary sector. So, you know, most of what we do in life, we don't do because the law instigates or stipulates that we do, but because there is a sense of human responsibility. And this comes from education, it comes from, a sense of social responsibility, religiosity if you want. I mean, certain people go out of their way to volunteer or to give in charity or such out of religious obedience or religious duty, others out of civic duty. It's fine, that is how life progresses. So I think that we need to understand the concept of freedom, but within the dominion of being applicable. And of course, I mean, when you come to govern, you will need to pass by laws, and laws that define people who abide by and contravene, and therefore some will be law-abiding and others will be not law-abiding. And that is the way that life goes, but within the parameters. I believe that if we do concentrate on the priorities that fulfill the interest, the real interests of people on the streets, governments will be given the freedom, if you wish. They will be given the allowance to carry out their duty of governance simply because they will have the trust. At this moment of time, there is the breakdown of trust between subjects and between governments, and this is a global phenomenon, by the way, which then we see every single law passed as being part of the system of oppression. And that's where the problem lies. I just want to respond very quickly to the issue of the idol worshippers. The concept of idol worshipping in Arabia at that particular era in which the Prophet Muhammad confronted was about subjugating people's minds. It was about self-serving interests, because that idol is basically an idol for me. I would shape that idol according to my own whims. I would create my own creed through the shape and format of that idol and call on people to worship to serve my own interests. So in a sense, the destruction of the idols was a destruction of the subjugation of mind, of the subjugation of human beings. It wasn't the act itself of destructing a particular god. And therefore, let me expand this a little bit, because one of the accusations that is leveled against Muslims is that if we had, theoretically, if we had an Islamic government or a Muslim government instilled in any particular country, the first thing they would do, burn down churches, temples, synagogues, and the such, which is a false accusation. And false by what means? False by, I'm referring to Islam as I understand it as a religion. Whether people are idiotic enough then to carry out those acts, that's something else. I can't legislate for people's idiocy or politics. But I'm often confronted with the incident of the Buddhist statues in the Bamyan incident in Afghanistan, and how when the Taliban came to government, how they destroyed those statues that had been standing for centuries. And my response to this was that actually this particular incident, it demonstrates and it proves without any shadow of doubt that Muslims do not destroy other people's sacred relics, because those statues had been standing for centuries under successive Muslim Islamic governance and rules. And in fact, for hundreds of years, Muslim governments, Islamic governments, had been paying for caretakers to look after not only the statues themselves, but to cater for the visitors of those statues. That was part of the government's duties. It was only when the Taliban government came in the mid-90s that they saw fit, out of political interest, to mobilize their own masses, to divert people's attentions from the poverty, from the lack of security, from the lack of any kind of economic development, and to focus their attention on something which no one was talking about, no one was worried about, no one was losing sleep over, no one was feeling less as a Muslim because of their presence, that they did what they did. And even then, if we remember, the most famous scholars around the Muslim world, including Shaykh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, he went himself, an old man, he traveled himself and met with the religious leaders of the Taliban, begging them, urging them, appealing to them not to do this. Yet they did, because it was a political decision, it wasn't a religious decision. So I just wanted to touch on that particular issue.
Okay. Right. I'm going to go into my comfort zone, yeah, for the first question to the law. This concept of ultimate freedom, or complete freedom. Of course, there's no such thing. Yeah? Although it's an argument used by our government against people like me a lot. You know, you're asking for freedom. There's no such thing as ultimate freedom. They say, in a very condescending voice. And my answer is, of course, there's not. Right? I can't defame you, for example. Now, the issue here is it about the limitations on freedom? It's the limitations on the limitations. And of course, you have freedom. You know, you have to limit freedom of speech. For example, hate speech. I would think a law against hate speech would be a good thing, right? But how far do you limit the freedom? Yeah? So how far are the limitations going to be limited? And this is a question of attitude. It's not a question of law. The law cannot legislate for this. So, for example, if you look at the Sunday Times case in 1979, it was held that freedom is the aspiration. It is the good. So anything that you do to limit it has to be with that in mind. So if you have that in mind, then any limitation that you make, you be very careful before you do it. You can do it, but you'll be very, very careful to make sure that, look, if we do this, it's to prevent a much greater harm. You look for evidence. It's not just hearsay, you know, that kind of thing. You're very cautious when you limit it. But if you consider freedom as an irritant, if you consider freedom as something which is annoying, then of course, any power that you have to limit it, you will use, and you will use it without anything holding you back, because your mindset is like that. And for me, that is the issue. Should there be limitations on freedom? Of course. But how far do we limit the limitations? That's something for the mind, it's not something for the law. The second question about the irrationality of the government, how to respond? You change the government, no? I mean, like, how else do we respond? But actually, it's a good question. I remember there was a 10-year-old boy. He asked me once, rather clever young man. He says to me, what qualifications do you need to be a politician? And I thought about it, and I said, actually, none. And he, you know, he's a smart kid, but lazy, right? So he was thinking, that sounds like a good career prospect. You know, I don't have to go to university. I don't have to study hard. I can be a politician. I can be a prime minister. You know, and you know, that is the problem with democracy, which, as Churchill said, is a terrible system of governance, but the only choice we have. We have to make, and this is what I said just now at the beginning of my talk. That is why it's so important that no matter how small we are as this group, that we have to keep on pushing the voice of rationality, because there is so much irrationality there. I don't know whether the government is irrational or they are catering to the irrational, because they are afraid that if they don't cater to the irrational, they will lose their political power base. You know, I know I make fun of them all the time, calling them all sorts of names, etc. But I know they cannot even be that stupid, honestly. You know, that is a level of stupidity which is beyond anything. All right, okay. So that's a question, and the reason why the irrational are given so much leeway is because there isn't enough alternative voices to show the rational. And that is why no matter where, no matter how small, no matter how weak we might feel, we have to keep pushing it. There's no other choice. And of course, at the end of the day, vote them out.
Can we have a second round of questions, please? Yeah, I saw someone standing just now. Yep.
An article about a Sudanese lady being persecuted to death. What's your opinion on this? One camp is saying Allah is greatest. The other camp is saying freedom of religion must be allowed. Oh no, this is a Sudanese woman sentenced to death. For converting to Christianity.
Yeah, but I think because she married a Christian. Yeah, to a Christian girl. Yeah.
Do you want to take that?
Yeah, I'll take 2 more questions. Yeah, please.
Hi, my name is Shahida. Thank you to the speakers for the insightful comments that you've made. I have a question for Dr. Azmi and Dr. Anas. Dr. Azmi, religious conservatism in Malaysia seems to be co-driven by the political institutions as well as the religious bureaucracy here. Could you comment a bit about what is driving conservatism within the bureaucracy itself, within the religious authorities? Is it the people, the education backgrounds, or and to Dr. Anas, to the issue of political leaders using religion to legitimize their political actions, do you see a role for religious leadership to moderate the voices of these political leaders? Yeah, that's a kind of general question, sorry.
One more, please. We can take one more, yep.
Hello, my name is Jin, and this question is directed to Dr. Anas. In the case of freedom, the definition of freedom that many Western debaters use is that freedom is doing what one wishes as long as it does not harm another human being or another creature. And in that context, many of the religions, when they are introduced to a country and their numbers grow, they tend to be pretty pervasive and invasive on the people who does not believe in that religion and their lifestyle. In the case of England, there are many regions in England where there are Muslim people trying to enforce Sharia law onto English people who are Christians or Protestants who are atheists. And so in that case, it goes against what you said about Islam, which is freedom and not forcing anyone to do anything by means of fear or force or oppression. So what do you think about those Muslim people? Are they interpreting the word of Quran wrong? Or is it what they're supposed to do? Or, yeah.
Thank you, Anas. Yep, yeah, sure.
I'll try to be brief. On the issue of Maryam in Sudan, I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's a senior government official in Sudan just a couple of days ago. I called him up and asked him what on earth they were doing. And was this really necessary? Was this the right thing to do? And have they really closed down all other avenues to see fit to, to let this woman go? And, once again, we have a situation whereby a country that is riddled with economic problems, with political crises, with fears of division, with an internal struggle, some of it on a military level, really doing something that is not on the public agenda. It's not on the public agenda. I mean, sometimes I ask myself this. Who amongst, let's say, in the case we're talking about Sudan, who, in the case of Sudan, in terms of the tens of millions of Sudanese, who is actually thinking of this as, one of the problems that they're facing on a daily level? Who is actually thinking of this woman, oh, she left Islam and she embraced Christianity? I mean, who is really worried about this? And to me, to be honest, I can only see that there are none. And it's just simply a political issue. The case of this particular woman is even more tragic, because she had a Muslim father and a Christian mother. She was brought up by her mother's side and by her uncles, and therefore, her argument in front of the judge was that she was never raised as a Muslim. She was always raised as a Christian. So there is no issue. We have submitted several letters and messages to the Sudanese president. We've spoken to the foreign minister, we've spoken to the interior minister, we've spoken to the justice minister in Sudan, all appealing to them to release and to show clemency. But to be honest, I think that once again, whether she is pardoned, which is a possibility, or whether the sentence is carried out, which would be a tragedy, I believe, on every single level. I think it's a side issue. The main issue is, until when will we have religion? And by the way, I say this, and just so that, because I've noticed that we are on camera, we're on record, I need to state my claim here. I was asked just a few weeks ago, I was on the BBC, and someone asked me about the penal code. In fact, I was on Al Jazeera English, head-to-head with Mehdi Hassan. There was an interview with Tariq Ramadan, and I was one of the panelists. And we were pressed, myself and him, we were pressed on to condemn some of the penal codes in Islam. And I said, no, I'm not going to condemn it. I believe in it because it's in the Quran, and I believe and I submit to the Quran, word for word, letter for letter. I submit to the authentic hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's no question. However, to me, the conditions under which need to be present so that these penalties need to be carried out are equally as important. Including social justice, including fairness and equality, including that these hudud, they are to be implemented on every single person if they were to contravene that particular law. When those verses, السارق والسارقة فاقطعوا أيديهما, regarding the amputation of the arms of the hands of thieves, when that verse was revealed, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam came and made a proclamation. لو أن فاطمة بنت محمد سرقت لقطعت يدها. If Fatima, my daughter, was to steal, I would cut off her hand. That was the very first premise of al-hudud being implemented. Because if people feel, well, it's only for the working class and not for the ruling class, the conditions aren't there. If there's extreme poverty out of corruption, then the conditions aren't there. And that's why just a couple of years after the death of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the second Khalifa Umar ibn al-Khattab suspended that particular hudud because the conditions weren't there. There was a famine. People needed to eat. And therefore they would steal things to eat. So he suspended that particular punishment. So there is a context there are conditions that need to be there. And at this moment of time, I don't see the conditions prevalent anywhere. There is no such condition. And therefore I would rather that the ulama in Sudan, in Saudi Arabia, in Pakistan, in Iran, elsewhere, be pressing on their governments to provide for the social context, for the context, for the social justice. I mean, I would rather that a alim says this to the government. Provide equality, provide fairness, provide social justice, rid our country from corruption, build an infrastructure whereby human capacity and human development is possible, make it absolutely accessible for everyone to make every politician accountable, and then implement hudud. And when you do, we'll be happy for you to do so. That should be the message. So that is the situation. I hope I've responded in regards with the question on Sudan. Now, I very much like the idea and the concept of religious leaders playing a role in moderating and bringing to task politicians, rather than religious leaders often, and obviously I'm not generalizing, we have some extremely good, very brave, courageous religious leaders out there, but unfortunately they're outnumbered at this moment of time wherever we look. But it would be extremely heartening if we had religious communities and religious leaders actually demanding that politicians be reined in. And like I said, I mean, the main problem that we suffer today, and this is, by the way, globally and to a various level. I mean, we have corruption on so many levels. I mean, when we have a system, I mean, the other day I was confronted with someone who was accused of a particular well, not crime, but a particular misdemeanor of saying something. He was accused of this in the press. And I spoke to him and I said, did you really do this? He said, absolutely not. I said, well, you should take them to court. He said, well, I'd love to, but the problem is I don't have money to take this person to court. And they know that. They know that they can't, that I don't have the funds to take them to court. Now, that to me shows a deeply ingrained organic level of corruption within the judicial system. If it takes money and the judiciaries and the courts become only accessible to the rich, then we don't have a judicial system to speak of. We have a level of corruption, whether it be financial, economic, whether it be political, social that we need to address. And the people that have the tools to address these are the religious leaders, because every single religion that I know of speaks about fairness, speaks about piety, speaks about freedom, speaks about honor, speaks about dignity. Well, you know, the first people you should be speaking to are not the people who are already there in the mosques or in the temples or in the churches. You should speak to people who are sitting in parliaments, because they're the ones who are breaking every single one of those premises. So I think that yes, there is that kind of duty, and I think that maybe it's time for congregations, people like ourselves, who are members of those religious congregations, to bring, first of all, our religious leaders to task and ask them whether they're doing their job in upholding the principles of their own faith and religion. For them then to, I mean, there needs to be some sort of structure to address the kind of problems that we face today. And finally, in terms of the Muslims in the UK. Now, there is, I mean, let's set a rule here. In every single human society, there are anomalies. There are people who are on the fringes who, you know, who make proclamations that the vast majority of that particular community don't subscribe to. Call them extremists, if you will. Call them fanatics. Every single, I mean, at this moment of time, to be honest, when people talk about extremism, it's only those like Tony Blair and his ilk that coin extremism with Islam. They only know extremism to be tied in with Islam. Yet at this moment of time, to be absolutely honest, the kind of extremism that we face in Europe is the far-right extremism. I mean, we have that. Only recently, we had a group called Britain First, a nationalistic, extremist, thuggish kind of element that actually attacked, they invaded a number of mosques. And they went in and they started shouting, they started giving out pamphlets demeaning Islam, demeaning Muslims. And to me, I mean, as far as I can recall, I can't recall, as there are obviously many even, incidents in which certain Muslims became involved in, which were criminal, stupid, idiotic. But as far as I can recall, I don't recall any Muslim ever entering a church and doing the same, or a synagogue and doing the same, despite the fact that they're there and open and actually willing for people to enter their doors, because churches now are absolutely empty and vacant. So that hasn't happened, but no one is talking of it. Not one political leader has called on the Christian community to come and condemn the acts of these thugs. No senior religious figurehead has come forward and said, you know, these people don't speak in our name. Yet when any Muslim does anything, the Muslim organizations as a whole are asked to, you know, to come forward in front of cameras and microphones and condemn and apologize and the such. There's this disparity, and that is what's fueling this kind of, and by the way, it's glorifying and it's recruiting for those minority extremist elements on the fringes of the Muslim community. Those who are calling for Sharia in Britain, to be honest, I think I would be totally exaggerating their numbers if I said that they were dozens. They're not even dozens. They're not even dozens. They might be, you know, 20, 30 people, and no one knows who they are, no one listens to them. Their figurehead is someone called Anjum Chowdhury, and a very dislikable, unsavory, unpleasant person. Most Muslims don't like him. The vast majority of Muslims who meet with him leave totally bewildered by his arrogance and his total ignorance. So to be honest, Muslims in Britain calling for Sharia, I don't know who they are. And I don't want us to conflate two things. Muslims wanting to be governed themselves by certain laws, which, by the way, the law allows them. I mean, we have, and I think it's very similar to Malaysian law, and Dr. Azmi will know, that British law allows for religious communities to be governed by their own scriptures, and therefore we have the Jewish community that has its own religious councils, particularly in matters of family affairs, financial affairs, and the such, that don't infringe on their citizenship to Britain and their allegiance to British law, British common law. So, calling for Muslims to also have their laws within the parameters of British law is something which is their right, as well as, you know, the Buddhist community, the Hindu community, and every other community that wishes to do the same. we don't want to conflate that with the call of those 20 or 30 idiots whom I would suggest, who are calling for the implementation of Sharia in the entire British Isles and whipping people who drink and stoning people. Otherwise we'd be doing nothing else in Britain. But, lashing drunkards and stoning adulterers. It would be quite problematic. So that's my point on that.
Yeah, I think before we close session, I think I'll take probably one last question. But before that, I have a question for you as well. What do you reckon of Hizb ut-Tahrir over there? Was this right-wing extremism of the British, or basically a backlash against this Hizb ut-Tahrir activism over there?
Which one?
Hizb ut-Tahrir, they're basically fighting for establishing an Islamic caliphate.
I'll be honest. I mean, I have many well-known differences with Hizb ut-Tahrir. I don't think that their methodology is correct. However, I have to say that I am quite close to the leadership of Hizb ut-Tahrir. One thing that I will say in their favor is that they are absolutely and all the time open for a debate and a discussion. And for that, they have my respect. I disagree with their methodology. I don't think that, I personally don't see that the issue of the Khilafah is a sacred cause that all Muslims should rally behind. They differ, and it's their right. They have, certain evidence which they quote from the Quran and the Hadith, which gives them that right. But I also have the right to disagree with them. And I think that the concept of an Islamic state is alien to Islam. An Islamic state could be a means. If it happens, fine. If it doesn't happen, it's not the end. It's not the be-all and end-all. I personally have seen that those examples of so-called Islamic states haven't served the cause of the Muslims or Islam. In fact, if anything, they've been to the detriment of Islam and Muslims. I don't think that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, strived to establish an Islamic state. What we do strive for is to proliferate Islamic values, the values of Islam. And essentially those values are the values that we've been talking about humanity, about dignity, about freedom, about equality, about liberty, about justice. Those are the values of Islam. And they are universal values. And if they were to happen, if they were to take place anywhere in the world, that would be fine. Why would I need a national state, a geographical location with a national flag and a national football team and the national anthem? Why would I need that? When I, have Muslims and people who, when in the incident in the seerah of the Prophet, in the story of the Prophet, when he sent the very first wave of migrants to Abyssinia, or today's Ethiopia, it was ruled by a priest, by an emperor who was a Christian scholar. And when he gave his justification for doing so, he actually told these people to leave their families, leave their homes, leave his own group and travel to that foreign Christian country. And when he was asked about this, he said, إِنَّ فِيهَا مَلِكًا لَا يُظْلَمُ عِنْدَهُ أَحَدٌ. It is ruled by a king in whose presence no one is dealt with unjustly. Justice. And that's what matters. It doesn't matter that he's a Christian. And therefore we find today Muslims, if offered the chance, people even living under the dominion of Islam in countries which, I'd rather not name, if given the chance to get green cards and travel to America, they jump at it. They travel to France and Britain and reside there. What does that tell you? It doesn't matter. I don't need a ruler who prays 5 times a day and fasts twice a week and all of Ramadan and spends the night in prayer and knows the Quran and recites it beautifully, who is also a dictator. I don't need that kind of person. I'd rather have someone who either is of a different religion or of no religion whatsoever, but who is a just leader. That is, I think, a matter of common sense.
Yes, I guess you should also elaborate that tomorrow in front of Pas Adilok. We're having a session tomorrow, at GMM.
You say it like it's a challenge.
Yeah, it's too much, And yes.
The girl's question wasn't answered.
Huh? The girl's question?
Yeah, there was one question. I have to deal with it. She asked a question.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Right, I'll be brief. Patient, dude. All right, just one point about, what your question about, and I'm glad Dr. Anna says there's only a few of them. Because we have to remember this, yeah? Newspapers like two things, sex and nutcases. Either one will sell newspapers, and nutcases are brilliant, and the most recent nutcases I can think of in our context are those who were slaughtering the chicken because of Teresa Koch's video, right? And there must be some law about slaughtering animals on the street, right? Okay, but anyway, so they were slaughtering the chickens, but the cameras all took pictures of them really close up. No one took a long shot. I bet you if you took a long shot, there might be about 10, 15 of them. But the way it's portrayed in the media is as if the whole bloody Malay race is slaughtering chickens. And that's a responsibility of the media. And why do they do that? Because it's, there's nothing sexy that day, so you put out the nutcases. And so we've got to be aware as to just how far the nutcases are actually influential and show them to be minimal and nuts. About your question, who asked the question just now about the AOSU? Right, the religious conservatism in this country. Well, basically because we've never, as far as I can tell, we've never really had enough critical mass on Islamic intellectualism in our education system. From school level up until university. Okay, let's just look at our neighbors in Indonesia. The pesantren, the sekolah pondok. It is conservative, yeah, right? But at the same time, it's actually quite questioning. The method of teaching is that the students are encouraged to question. They're encouraged to debate points of view which are in complete contrast or complete opposite to their own personal beliefs. Just to debate and to make sure that your own beliefs are strong enough to withstand that kind of debate. So they have that kind of training, where you're actually encouraged to think in a broad way. I've had a lecturer from the Universitas Islam in Solo a friend of mine, and we were speaking about this, and he was amazed. He was doing some research here in Malaysia and the universities, and he says the Islamic academics in this country, as far as they're concerned, analysis of the Quran is, okay, this is Surah 5 verse 16 says this. Surah 16 verse 15 says this. There's no analysis. And incidentally, his thesis was on analyzing the Quran from a Marxist perspective. And when he said that to the people in UIA and UM, they were like, they didn't know what to do. I've had students from Indonesia again who are studying in my university saying, oh my God, the level of discussion, the level of discourse at so-called Islam, in the Islamic department is so low, it's so poor. And that's what we have. We don't have that intellectualism. So therefore, it's easy to have a very conservative, very reactive kind of approach to religion. And of course, this kind of approach fits our government very well. Thank you very much. And so it feeds upon each other. It feeds upon each other. They don't want a greater, more thinking, more critical approach to faith, because it doesn't serve their purpose. So it just makes, it's a catch-22. It just makes everything worse and worse and worse and worse.
I saw some hands, yep. Couple of hands, yep.
Assalamu alaikum. My question is for Dr. Anas Zakariti.
You're too tall, man.
Okay, my question is about our Muslim communities, I mean majorities, about can we reach one day a level like European countries and America and Canada, that we can accept some Muslim can convert to Christianity or other religion, that they consider them kuffar or in wrong way. This is okay.
You want to take another question?
Yes. This gentleman here.
Listening to the few speakers, I thought I make an opinion. First of all, I would like to quote what Gandhi said, that the interrelationship between religion and politics. He said, religion is politics, and those who do not believe in that neither know religion nor know politics. So we see the interrelationship of things. In the question of freedom in Dr. Anana's talk, I have a problem in understanding that the civic way of understanding the concept of freedom, which you said should not be the case, but that freedom is sacred. But when you see only from a religious point of view, and religion for some people, like in this country, religion is only Islam. All the other religions don't exist as such, at least technically and in constitution, though the liberty for other religions are given in the very constitution itself. When it comes in the public performance, it's always about Islam only. So, seeing from that perspective, we who are non-Muslims have a lot of difficulties and problems in that sense. And also I wish to say that the freedom of religion to be absolute is a question like the freedom of being bondage as well. What we see is the interdependence of the concept of freedom and the interdependence of the concept of bondage. Nothing is absolute as such. Sorry, I didn't say my name. Dr. Sumanasiri, a Malaysian, but who lives in England as well.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Anas.
Very quickly, I don't think that we should be too keen to emulate the European model. It's not an entirely successful model. It has some ideals which are very good, if only they were practiced. There is a big internal debate happening today about what European principles are. Because it turns out that the principles that modern secular democracies, as the case in Europe, those principles aren't really being upheld in practice. And I've given several examples, whether within Europe or even in terms of Europe's relationship or European countries' relationship with the other countries. So the model itself, I mean, I think we should come to an agreement. As human beings, I think we should accept the fact that we should acknowledge the principles, the governing, the universal principles that govern our relationships with each other, okay? And agree on those. And I don't think that anyone, in terms of the concepts themselves, no one would disagree. And then we agree on a second thing, and that is that we are still working to find a model in which those concepts could be applicable. And by the way, this is not to say that no, Europe is so bad. No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that it's still a model trying to find itself. We're now seeing a shift in many, many European countries towards the far right. We're now seeing the rise of anti-immigration laws, of anti-Islamic laws, of politics, like we've never seen before. It's as though we're back now 40 or 50 years ago when we had the policies against the blacks, and about 70 or 80 years ago when we had the anti-Semitic policies and stands regarding the Jews. So it's as though we are now back in the same place. The other day I was actually sharing a platform with a rabbi, a very good friend of mine. I mean, she's a brilliant commentator, and especially in terms of human rights and the like. We were sharing a platform, and in her presentation, she read out a few headlines from the Daily Mail, one of our most famous newspapers, a right-wing newspaper. And she read out a few headlines, and it sounded, everyone thought that those were about, the Muslims, that a religious leader tells his flock that, everyone else is an infidel and they ought to be, the part of the congregation go on a march in order to transfer their entire community to their own and the such. And I was sitting next to her. My impression was that these were headlines about the Muslim community. They were the kind of headlines that we're seeing virtually every day in newspapers like the Daily Mail. Then she surprised everyone by saying, these headlines are from the Daily Mail 100 years ago. They were talking about the Jewish community. It's almost the identical terms, the very same tactics, and sometimes the very same images. Also the crazed religious leader that becomes a representative of the entire community, and so on and so forth. So what I'm saying is, that we should, as human beings, we should find our model. I mean, today we're talking about religion and religious freedoms. But essentially, we're talking about our place as human beings in the world that God created. We're not being able to find that place. And that is either due to political oppression, to religious oppression, ideological oppression, whatever it is. I mean, only about 5-6 years ago, we saw a crime on such a massive scale that no one is talking about. And that is the economic global crisis. If I could only have the time to describe to you what that did to the world, a few mega financial institutions committed a mass crime, a global crime against billions of people, and were rewarded with immense riches, with great bonuses. No one lost their job. No one went to prison as a result, just 2 or 3 scapegoats. But it was a mass crime that till now, millions, if not billions of people are still suffering as a result of. In my neighborhood alone, 4 people lost their homes. One of them, an elderly couple who had 1.5 years to go to pay off their mortgage. And because the man was made redundant, he was 63, he'd been working for the same company for 32 years. He couldn't fulfill the payments, they were kicked out of their house that they had lived in for more than 30 years, where their children were born. You tell me that isn't a crime. So we shouldn't be too keen to emulate a system that is failing on so many levels. Maybe not on the same grotesque level like we're seeing in Egypt or Syria or Iraq or these countries, but on a very profound level. The other question in regards with, I will agree with you. I think that what your comment deserves is a lot of debate and a lot of discussion. I agree with you that we need to find that kind of relationship between religion and politics. And I agree with you, by the way, when I speak to, one of the things that I'm quite keen on is speaking to young Muslims, telling them about political engagement. And this is despite the fact that I'm one of the most vocal critiques of the political system. But I find that this is the way to change. You need people to work from within. As Dr. Azmi said, you need to change government. You don't like it, you change it. And you change it through elections. You change it by entering it and reforming it from within. That's the way that we believe in. So I also tell people, when they say, no, politics is haram, you shouldn't get involved in the such. And I say to them, what are you talking about? Religion is politics. It's about change. It's about reformation. It's about transformation. It's about ridding corruption. It's all about politics. What are you talking about? You can't separate religion and politics. But we need to find that kind of balance of interaction, so that we don't get to a stage where politics becomes religious politics and no other, whereby anyone else who doesn't subscribe to the religion becomes alienated. And we don't have political religions, whereby religions become politicized. Those two concepts we need to avoid. And we need to find that kind of interaction and that kind of balance.
I guess we're running late. The chairperson is not here. So we're supposed to have actually a workshop, but I guess because we're running late, and I guess we have only 1.5 hours before our next session, which is going to be more interesting because we're talking about something which is more relevant to this country, about the persecution of, in the name of religion. Yeah, that's very important, especially in this country. And we have, leaders from Baha'i community over here, leaders from Ahmadiyya communities over here, and other denominations as well. So I guess that this is going to be a very hot and important topic for us to discuss. And I think we need a good rest. So we'll probably forego our workshop. And I think I'll invite the chairperson to invite all of you for lunch.